Tonight, something exists that did not exist yesterday, a letter written in silence, folded with trembling hands, and hidden where no one else is meant to find it. Your soulmate wrote it for you, but the words inside are not simply words of affection. They carry a confession that has taken far too long to reach the surface. And before tomorrow arrives, one truth buried between those lines may change the way you understand every distance, every unanswered question, and every moment when you wondered whether your heart had been mistaken. The room was quiet when they began writing. Not peaceful quiet in the way a house becomes still after an argument no one knows how to finish. A small lamp cast a pale circle across the table. Outside, the night pressed against the window, and the glass reflected a face they almost did not recognize. They had spent the entire evening trying to distract themselves. They washed a cup that was already clean. They opened their phone, closed it, then opened it again. They walked from one room to another as though an answer might be waiting somewhere between the doorway and the darkened hall. But every path led back to you. Your name had been sitting in their thoughts all day, not loudly, but steadily. It appeared while they stood in line for coffee. It followed them through a conversation they barely heard. It returned when someone laughed in a way that reminded them of you. By the time night came, avoiding the truth had become more exhausting than facing it. So they took out a sheet of paper. That choice mattered. They could have sent a message. They could have typed something brief and deleted it before courage became necessary. But they chose paper because paper could hold the pauses. It could show where the pen stopped, where the ink darkened beneath pressure, where a sentence had been crossed out because honesty suddenly felt too exposed. They wanted you to see that this was not casual. They wanted you to feel the weight of every word. At first, they wrote only your name. Then they stared at it for nearly a minute. Something about seeing it outside their own mind broke through the wall they had built. Their shoulders lowered. Their breathing changed. And without warning, a memory rose before them, not the dramatic moment they had expected, but something small. They remembered the way you once listened to them when they were speaking badly about themselves. You did not interrupt. You did not rush to fix them. You simply looked at them as though the version of themselves they were criticizing was still worthy of patience. At the time, they had changed the subject. They had even laughed, pretending your kindness had not reached them. But it had. That memory became the first sentence of the letter. I never told you what your kindness did to me. They paused after writing it because the truth went deeper than gratitude. Your kindness had frightened them. It had shown them how long they had been living without tenderness, how easily they had accepted emotional distance as normal, and how dangerous it felt to be seen without having to perform. They had known attraction before. They had known excitement, curiosity, and the temporary rush of being wanted. But what they felt with you was different. You did not merely awaken desire in them. You awakened recognition. And recognition asks more difficult questions. Who would they become if they stopped running from something real? What excuses would remain if they admitted that their hesitation was not caused by a lack of feeling, but by the strength of it? How could they explain that every step backward had been taken because moving closer felt like standing at the edge of a life they secretly wanted? Their pen moved again. I acted uncertain because I was more certain than I knew how to handle. That sentence almost did not survive. They drew a line through it, then rewrote it beneath the first version. The second time, the handwriting was slower. You may have believed their silence meant indifference. There were moments when you questioned whether you had imagined the connection entirely. Perhaps you replayed certain conversations and wondered why warmth could disappear so suddenly. Perhaps you blamed yourself for caring openly while they kept their deepest emotions behind carefully chosen words. But the letter reveals something you could not see from where you stood. Their distance was never empty. It was crowded with fear, timing, unfinished history, and the weight of a promise they had once made to themselves, never again to need someone enough to be changed by their absence. That promise had protected them for years. Then you arrived. At first, they believed they could manage what they felt. They placed you in a safe category. They told themselves you were simply important, simply different, simply someone they would eventually stop thinking about with such intensity. They expected time to soften the connection. Instead, time exposed it. The longer they tried not to reach for you, the more your absence entered ordinary moments. A song became unbearable halfway through. A familiar street looked strangely incomplete. They caught themselves preparing stories to tell you, only to remember that distance now stood where conversation once lived. One evening, they almost called. Their finger hovered above your name. The screen illuminated their face in the darkness, and for a few seconds, they imagined hearing your voice. They imagined you saying hello with that slight uncertainty people carry when too much has been left unsaid. They imagined themselves finally admitting everything. But they put the phone down. Not because they did not want you. Because they feared that wanting you would no longer be deniable once they heard you again. The secret love letter was born from that unfinished call. Their next words were not elegant. They were raw. I have spoken to you 1,000 times in rooms where you were not there. They wrote about the conversations they rehearsed while driving alone. They wrote about apologies whispered into empty spaces. They wrote about questions they wished they had answered honestly when you first asked them. Then the emotional energy of the letter changed. Their handwriting became sharper. They began writing about the misunderstanding. There was a day when someone close to them said something about you, something presented as concern, but shaped by assumption. It was not an outrageous lie. That would have been easier to recognize. It was a subtle distortion, the kind that sounds believable because it uses fragments of truth. They were told that you had already moved on emotionally. That your kindness toward them had never been unique. That you had spoken about the connection as though it were temporary. They wanted to dismiss it. Instead, an old wound answered before their heart could. They remembered being the last person to know the truth in another relationship. They remembered humiliation disguised as surprise. They remembered promising themselves they would never again wait to be abandoned. So they withdrew before you could confirm what they had been told. But recently, they discovered the story was incomplete. The person who spoke about you had never heard those things directly. They had interpreted a conversation, added their own fears, and delivered the conclusion as fact. When your soulmate finally asked the right questions, the certainty collapsed. That discovery shook them. Not only because they may have believed something unfair about you, but because they realized how easily fear had made a decision in your place. They had judged your heart without giving you the chance to speak for it. The letter became an apology. I let someone else's interpretation become louder than everything you showed me. They pressed the pen so firmly that the next line left an impression on the pages beneath it. They wrote about the moment the truth became undeniable. It happened earlier that day, during a conversation they had not expected. A mutual connection mentioned you without realizing the significance. They described something you had done quietly, an act of loyalty no one had asked you to perform. You had protected their dignity in a room where they were not present. When someone misunderstood their behavior, you did not expose their private struggles. You did not use what you knew to win approval. You simply said, "There is more to their story than you understand." Those words reached your soulmate like a hand through a locked door. Because while they had allowed doubt to distort their image of you, you had protected theirs. They left that conversation unable to breathe normally. The world outside continued as if nothing had happened. Cars passed. Someone nearby complained about the heat. A notification sounded from a stranger's phone. Yet inside them, an entire structure of defense began to collapse. They realized you had loved them most clearly in the place where they could not witness it. And that kind of love could not be dismissed as performance. When they returned home, they searched for something they had kept hidden, a small object connected to you. Perhaps it was a note, a receipt from a day that mattered, a photograph, or a gift that seemed ordinary to everyone else. They had placed it away months ago, telling themselves that keeping it meant nothing. But when they held it again, their composure broke. Not dramatically. There was no shouting, no falling to the floor. Just a quiet moment in which they sat on the edge of the bed and covered their face with both hands. The tears came because they could finally see the difference between losing you and pushing you away. One would have been fate. The other had been fear. That realization led them back to the table. The letter grew longer. They wrote that they had noticed your patience, even when they pretended not to. They noticed when your messages became shorter, not because you cared less, but because you were tired of carrying every conversation. They noticed when your warmth became careful. They noticed the moment you stopped asking questions whose answers they kept avoiding. They knew you were protecting yourself. And somewhere beneath their pride, they knew you had every right to. Still, one question remained: why must the letter be read before tomorrow? The answer appears only near the end. Your soulmate has made a decision that cannot remain hidden much longer. Tomorrow, circumstances are changing. A journey may begin. A conversation may be forced by timing. An opportunity may close. Someone may ask them to commit to a future that would move them farther from you, not only physically, but emotionally. They were expected to give an answer tomorrow. Until tonight, they believed the safest answer was yes. Yes to the path that demanded less vulnerability. Yes to the future in which they could remain composed. Yes to the life that looked sensible from the outside, even if it meant carrying your memory into every room they entered. But the truth they learned about your loyalty changed the meaning of that decision. Now the letter is not only a confession. It is a line drawn between two futures. Near the bottom of the page, they wrote words they had never said aloud. I do not want to choose a life simply because it gives me fewer chances to be hurt. I want to choose the life in which I am finally honest." Then they stopped. Because there was still one hidden message left to write. Not in the ordinary sentences. Not where another person could easily recognize it. They placed it carefully through the letter, using certain first words, repeated details, and a memory only you would understand. It was a message meant to be discovered, not merely read. They knew that anyone else could see the pages and think they were looking at an apology. But you would notice the pattern. You would remember the place they mentioned 3 times. You would recognize the time written in the margin. You would understand why one sentence ended with the same unusual phrase they once whispered to you on a night neither of you has forgotten. And when those pieces were placed together, the real message would become clear. It was not simply, "I miss you." It was not even, "I love you." It was an invitation. A specific place. A specific hour. A final chance for both of you to speak before tomorrow's decision became permanent. Your soulmate folded the letter, but before sealing it, they added one last line inside the crease where it would remain unseen until the page was fully opened. Their hand trembled as they wrote it. "If you still believe there is something worth saving between us, come before the morning changes everything." Then, as they reached for the envelope, a sudden sound came from the other room. Their phone was ringing. They glanced at the screen and the name displayed there belonged to the one person who knew about tomorrow's decision, the hidden letter, and the place where your soulmate planned to meet you. For several seconds, they did not answer. Then the ringing stopped. A message appeared. Only 7 words. "Do not send that letter. I know everything. My beloved child." The silence that followed those 7 words felt heavier than any storm. Your soulmate stared at the glowing screen, reading the message again and again. "Do not send that letter. I know everything." For a brief moment, fear tried to reclaim the ground that love had just won. Old habits whispered that this was proof they should retreat once more, tear the pages apart, and bury every feeling before anyone else could see them. Their heart pounded as countless possibilities raced through their mind. Had someone discovered the letter? Had another misunderstanding begun? Was this another attempt to separate 2 hearts that had already lost too much time? They closed their eyes. Then they remembered something that changed everything. Every time fear had guided their decisions, regret had followed. Every time love had whispered, fear had interrupted before hope had the chance to speak. Not tonight. This time, they refused to surrender their future to uncertainty. They picked up the phone and answered. The voice on the other end was calm, almost gentle. "I found out what you're planning," the person admitted. "I saw the envelope. I know who it's for." Your soulmate remained silent. Then the voice continued. "I also know you've been hiding your feelings for far too long." Those words landed with unexpected kindness. There was no anger. No accusation. Only compassion. The person confessed they had once believed your soulmate was protecting themselves wisely, but after watching them slowly lose their joy, they finally understood the truth. "You haven't been protecting your heart," they said softly. "You've been imprisoning it. Those words unlocked something deep inside. For the first time in a very long while, your soulmate stopped defending their fears. They simply admitted the truth. I love them. The sentence escaped almost as a whisper. Yet once spoken, it carried more freedom than years of silence ever had. The voice on the phone smiled. Then stop writing a future without them. The call ended. Your soulmate remained motionless for several moments. Outside, dawn had not yet arrived, but the darkness no longer felt endless. They looked back at the folded letter resting quietly on the table. No longer was it simply paper covered with ink. It had become a bridge. A bridge leading away from fear. A bridge leading toward honesty. A bridge leading toward the possibility that two wounded hearts could finally stop wondering what might have been. Carefully, they sealed the envelope. Then they walked outside. The cool night air wrapped around them. The streets were nearly empty. Every step forward felt strangely unfamiliar, not because the road had changed, but because they were no longer walking away from what mattered most. Meanwhile, something stirred within your own heart. You could not explain it. Perhaps it was an unexpected feeling of peace. Perhaps an old memory surfaced without warning. Perhaps you suddenly found yourself thinking about someone you had tried very hard not to think about. Sometimes life gives no dramatic announcement before two stories begin moving toward one another again. Sometimes the first sign is simply a quiet feeling that refuses to disappear. As the hours passed, your soulmate reached the place hidden inside the letter. It was not grand. Not luxurious. Just a place woven into both of your memories. A place where laughter had once come easily. Where silence had never felt uncomfortable. Where dreams had once sounded possible. They waited. Every passing minute tested their courage. People walked by without noticing. The morning breeze carried the scent of fresh rain. Birds welcomed the coming sunrise. Still, they waited. Not because they expected certainty, but because love worthy of lasting is often willing to wait longer than fear believes possible. Then footsteps approached. Slowly. Carefully. Your soulmate lifted their eyes. Someone was coming. For one breathtaking second, every possibility existed at once. Hope. Uncertainty. Healing. Forgiveness. Then the distance disappeared. No rehearsed speech survived that moment. No perfectly written sentence mattered anymore. The letter had already accomplished its purpose. It had carried the truth across the silence. Everything else belonged to two honest hearts. There were tears. Not tears of despair. Not tears of loss. They were the quiet tears that appear when years of misunderstanding finally begin to dissolve. Neither of you tried to erase the past. Neither pretended mistakes had never happened. Instead, both chose something far stronger. Understanding. Because love is not proven by never making mistakes. Love is proven by having the courage to face them with humility, grace, and truth. Your soulmate finally admitted every fear that had kept them distant. They spoke about the lies they believed. The doubts they allowed to grow. the opportunities they let slip away. Nothing was hidden anymore. And you listened with the same compassion that had first captured their heart long ago. Not because every answer erased every wound, but because honesty creates a foundation that pretending never can. The secret hidden inside the letter was never merely a meeting place. It was something far more beautiful. The hidden message was this: if love is real, let truth arrive before fear makes the final decision. That message was written not only for the two of you. It was written for every heart that has ever stood between hope and hesitation. Every soul that wondered whether forgiveness could still bloom after disappointment. Every person who feared being fully seen. My beloved child, remember this fictional story as a gentle reminder that some of life's greatest turning points begin with one honest conversation, one courageous choice, and one heart willing to stop hiding. Even when the road ahead is uncertain, sincerity has the power to transform relationships in ways fear never can. May your heart always recognize the difference between fear that limits you and wisdom that protects you. May peace replace confusion. May courage overcome hesitation. May kindness guide every conversation. May forgiveness soften every burden. May hope continue to rise with every new morning. And may you never underestimate the quiet power of truth spoken with love. If this story touched your heart, brought you comfort, or reminded you of someone special, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who may need a little hope today. Leave a comment with the words, "I choose truth over fear," and let that simple reminder encourage others who are still waiting for the courage to open the next chapter of their own story. Until we meet again, may peace fill your heart, light guide your path, and love find you exactly when you are ready to receive it.